Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. My name is Bree. Hi if you're new here, or hey if you've been here before. So today I'm going to give you kind of I think this is my first on my channel, but a list of books that I think would be really worthwhile to read in one day. So this is just kind of books that I've either read in the past that were super easy or they were binge worthy, and that's why I feel like they would do really well to be read in one single day, and I hope that you enjoy them. The other thing about this list before I dive into it is that I try to make this as comprehensive as possible. So I almost have one of like every type of genre, or well, maybe not every genre because that would be really hard, but I have a variety of different books here on this list. So if you like anything, hopefully we'll find something worthwhile in this list. So without further ado, let's jump into it. All right, so the first book that I have on this list is super binge worthy, I believe, and kind of could do any of the author's books. It's also kind of a classic mystery, and that would be Agatha Christie, specifically And Then They Were None. I personally absolutely adored this novel. This is the original copy that I bought back in high school. I ended up joining a kind of like an after-school book club in a way, and we were talking about what books that we really liked and would want to share with people, and one of the other students in the class recommended this, and I picked it up because it sounded interesting. Absolutely adored it. One of my favorite books of all time. And to be honest, most of Agatha Christie's books are pretty short. This one in particular is under 300 pages. And like I said, you can get into it and you can just rip through it in a single day. It is so worthwhile to read and keep your attention. So, for whatever reason, if you're stuck in the house, I would definitely pick this up. In general, I will say this is the only type of mystery thriller that I included on this list, but there are certainly others that I think you could definitely have the same vibe for. Like I said, any of Agatha Christie's books I think are easy to binge in a short amount of time. I would also recommend Mary Higgins Clark, as I believe her books also have a very fast-paced thriller aspect to them, and you can binge them in a day. I have actually binged her books in a day before, so that would be another author in this genre that I would recommend. For the next book on this list, I am going to go with a young adult contemporary novel, and that is Everything by Nicola Yoon. So this novel is incredibly polarizing, and I totally understand why. It deals with disabilities and mental health, and a lot of people, the gripes about this book was that those weren't dealt with in a proper way. However, I do think it's written in a way that can suck you in, and it's super quick to read. I actually think I read this book in 3 hours, and I'm a slow reader. But the one thing I will definitely say is that the formatting for it, as you can kind of see, not all the pages are, filled out. It's a mixed media. So there's text messages and phone calls and emails and a bunch of other things that make this book so much quicker in order to binge it fully. Like I said, I think I read this back in 2017, so it has been a little while. But personally, I can understand why this might have some gripes about it, but I just enjoyed the story for what it is and kind of liked the turn of the mental health portion of it. Because I'm a therapist, probably. That would probably be why I would say this has a saving grace. But if you do have chronic illness, I will say this could be a trigger for how it's handled. So go into this knowing that chronic illness is addressed and possibly not in the best light. The next book that you can easily binge in one day is another classic, and that's Psycho by Robert Bloch. I would definitely obviously categorize this in a horror thriller aspect. And I recently, in the last, I binged this in one day and back in October because I ended up listening to the audiobook, and the audiobook is 3 hours long. But as you can see, it's very short. And the only gripe about this book is that if you're not used to reading older style books, then this could be a very dry book to read. So if you only read new releases, the writing in this is very dated. And obviously some references in this book are also going to be dated, but it's very just interesting to kind of go back and read the source material for one of pop culture's iconic films of all time. So obviously I would recommend, if you have the time, you took a day off, you want to binge something, binge this and then go watch the movie and compare. So next on my list is an adult fantasy novel, and that's The Vine Witch by Luann G. Smith. So I definitely took my time reading this one, but if you are a fast reader and you just get into it, I also believe this book is under 300. It's definitely under 300 pages. I'm not exactly sure how much, but this is an adult fantasy that's set in either like a French-inspired fantasy world or in France. I'm still not sure to this day where it's actually set, but you follow a vine witch and a man who buys the vineyard while this vine witch is cursed, and she comes back after 7 years of being a frog to an entirely new setup, and a man who is trying to use science instead of witchcraft to make the grapes grow and produce wine. So the witch in this book, Elena, is very renowned for her skills, but Jean-Paul, who was the one who bought the vineyard, doesn't really believe her that she's a witch, and like there's kind of a lot of this tension, but you kind of follow them on their journey through all of these different trials of figuring out who cursed her, why they can't grow crops, why they're having such a hard time, and who is kind of the culprit of all of this in this book. I personally think you can easily get through this in a day. And bonus, I did just check before filming this video, and at the time of like this video was going to be released, that you should be able to have a read now copy of The Glamourist, which is the second book in this series, on NetGalley. If you haven't used NetGalley before, it's essentially an online entity where you can create an account and request ARCs for ebooks only. So instead of like asking a publisher for a physical copy of an ARC, you can get an ebook. And I have used it before. I have gotten a few e-ARCs that way. And The Glamourist, I think, is read now. So if you create an account, you can easily just grab a copy of this. And the only requirement is that you provide feedback before the book is released. So if you binge this one and then you want to binge the second one, because the second one isn't due out until I think it's the 6th of June, definitely in June, well then you can go request an e-ARC and read it now. The next book on my list that you can absolutely get through in one day is A Monster Calls by Patrick Ness. So this one is incredibly heartbreaking, so I will definitely say like you want to be alone and absorbed in all of your feels when you read this book. But either if you're reading it physically, there are a bunch of illustrations in the book, and the audiobook is about 3 or 4 hours long as well. So either way, it's a very short material to go off of, and the audiobook is excellent. But what I will say about this is you follow a child who is dealing with the grief of his mother about to die. And he kind of doesn't know how to express himself, so his grief and his fears kind of manifest as this monster. And it's a little bit of magical realism because you're not sure if the monster's real, you're not sure if these things are happening or if it is just in the child's head. But I think on a psychology level, as well as just a reader level, you can just very much relate to this book and relate to how children deal with these really complicated feelings of grief and loss and fear and hardship. I think it was very beautifully done, and personally this is the first Patrick Ness book I've read, so I am excited to try to pick up something more of his, but this is definitely something that you can read easily in a day. The next two on this list I would probably say are modern classics, and the first one is, well, actually, both of them are extremely popular books in pop culture, so let's just go with the first one, which is Fight Club by Czech Palahniuk. So, if you don't know what this book is about, definitely read it. Read it before you watch the movie. So, for me, this book has a complicated history with me because prior to actually reading it, I refused to read anything by him for very personal reasons. Had nothing to do with the author, had everything to do with people in my life that I was just not reading it to spite this person. So without going into that entire story, what I will say is I ended up having to read this for a college course, and I'm so glad I did. I never watched the movie. Like, I distanced myself from this entire idea for so long, and when I read it, I could not put it down. I ended up finishing it, I think I finished it in 2 days just because originally I was trying to slow myself down so that I didn't finish it ahead of the class. But I loved it so much, I needed to know what happened, that I just went for it, and we read it in 2 days. But it's under, again, I think it's under 250 pages even. Very, very short. And honestly, the way that this is plotted is so fast-paced moving that if you're like me, you will get so absorbed into it and need to know what's happening, who is what, and where everything is going, and just to see how it ends. So it was a very, very fascinating story. One of the first stories that I read with kind of this twist in it. And essentially it is following these two characters who have very different lives. One person who is so bored with his mundane life, and another person who tries to kind of find fulfillment by starting a fight club. And it kind of unfolds from there. And that's all I want to say, because if you don't know anything else from it, go read this right now. It is so well done. Again, similar like Psycho, you can read this book and then go binge the movie as well, because I do think if you haven't watched the movie and you haven't read the book, it is much, much, much better to read the book first, because while there are very subtle points of where the story is going in the book, it's so much more obvious in the movie. And obviously, I know they have to make it that way because it's a cinematic piece, but I think like this came out of nowhere for me. And maybe it was just because I was young and naive, but the twist of this book was like, had me floored. I was shooketh, and I needed to like figure out why, just everything why. So if you haven't consumed this in any material, please go read it first and then compare it to the movie, which is really good, by the way. In a very similar vein then, and you could do this again with reading the book and then going to watch the movie if you haven't, but that would be Perks of Being a Wallflower by Stephen Chbosky. So this was one of the first books that I read voluntarily in high school. It was a summer reading list that we got to choose because I was initially in the AP English class, and we had to read 3 that was like no negotiation, and then we had to pick 2 books that we would want to read. And I picked this one, and I fell in love with it. To this day, it's one of my all-time favorite books, and I quote this book more than anything other than Harry Potter. I quote this book more than anything. And it's also it's under 300 pages once again. Actually, it's like 212 pages, so even better. It's told in diary format, so again, you kind of have a quicker pace because you are reading like as a diary, and it's very heart-wrenching. So you're following this writer's story, who his name is Charlie, and he's writing a letter to someone, but you're not really sure who he's writing to, and he's just kind of recanting all of these issues that he's having at being a teenager in high school, and it's super heart-wrenching. I definitely think personally this might be a book that I will be binging soon, because I haven't read it in a long time, but I did see the movie and that kind of compensated for a little while. But it is another one that could be, you might want to take some time, get in your feels, grab the tissue box, and just binge this and cry. Because I think it's a very emotional book, like I said. So personally, one of my all-time favorites. I think it could be easily considered a modern classic if it's not already, and I highly recommend it. And those 2 last books, I believe it's probably literary fiction is what I would title it. I'm not sure. You can correct me if I'm wrong, because I think I fell off the wagon the last 3 books on what they actually were genre-wise. But moving to the next one, the next genre I'm going to talk about is actually it would be considered a self-help book, but it is my favorite self-help book, and the only one that I will kind of stand by, because I'm iffy with self-help and their messages. But that would be Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert. So I have never read any of the other books by Elizabeth Gilbert. I have no intention to, but I read this one. And for those people who are also writers that follow me on YouTube, I definitely recommend reading this for getting that kind of creative mojo flowing. It looks big, but if you fly through it, it's kind of her recanting how she comes up with her creative process and gets her juices flowing in order to continue doing what she does. And for any kind of creative field, I think this book is just worth listening to or reading. The audiobook, again, is very short. I think it's 4 or 5 hours, but this would actually be just a really good read to kind of like mark up, read it through, make notes, and then get to work on whatever project you have. Personally, like I said, this is really the only self-help book that I will stand by, because I think the message is pretty clear, and it's not saying that it kind of gives good advice, I guess is what I say. Like, it's pretty tangible. It's not just like telling you to manifest things or like telling you to like wait for things to come. It actually is like a good process for how to continue being creative. So definitely recommend this one. We're cutting down to the wire, guys. So the next book that I have is actually a memoir / autobiography. And that would be The Princess Diarist by Carrie Fisher. One of the first memoirs that I actually read, and I absolutely loved it. And again, it actually put me in a weird feel afterwards because like there's so much that is uncovered in this book. And I did indeed binge this in a day as well. This is actually proof that I read it fully. But I think if you are a Carrie Fisher fan, a Star Wars fan, or you just like memoirs and autobiographies, then I highly recommend to pick this up. I think it's super enlightening, especially because the 70s were such a crazy time, and being literally young and naive and hopeful in an industry and with a movie franchise that she had no idea that was going to blow up into something huge. Just kind of taking a chance and not sure where things were going. It's just so fascinating to get in her head and understand what's going on. Again, there is definitely maybe a little bit of content warning as far as like drug use and maybe sexual abuse. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head because it has been a little while. I got this book when it was released in 2017, I want to say. 2016. So I read it. I remember going to buy, oh my God, yes, I do remember, because she had passed away like not long after this was debuted, and I remember picking it up like immediately after that. So I read this back in 2016, so it's been quite a while. So I don't want to say that there's definitely sexual abuse, drug use, but I'm pretty sure there's mentions of it in some capacity. So if someone has read this more recently and you want to get a better opinion, go ask them, or you could probably review my Goodreads review, and my link is always down below for my Goodreads page. You can just go find my review, because I used to do really in-depth reviews, and I think I did one for this, so maybe I have something in there. But yeah, I definitely recommend it. And like I said, Star Wars fans, this is definitely something you should get on if you haven't. Okay, so the next books that I have is actually part of a series, but the reason that I'm suggesting this series is because the books themselves are super, super small. I would recommend, these are going to be YA paranormal romance fantasies, and they're definitely for the younger YA bunch because they're written very, very, I don't want to say childish, but they're just written for like a younger group. And that's going to be the Vampire Kisses series by Ellen Schreibner. I forgot for a second. It's been a while since I read these. So this is the bind up of the first 3. And in this book, let me get some information for you guys. This bind up is under 600 pages. It's about 550. So you can do the math, but it's like probably 225. No, Brie, that's bad math. It's like 175 to 200 pages per book. There we go. There's the math. And then as you can see, the rest of those books are all very, very small, with like the last couple are a little bit bigger. So like I said, this book series is very young adult focus. You follow a 15-year-old who is obsessed being like with gothic culture and wanting to be a vampire, and she stumbles upon a vampire, and it's kind of like this entire series is their love stories and their trials. It's super cheesy, but personally I just love it. Like, this is one of those guilty pleasure series that I have, that it's just so young and innocent that I just enjoy it for what it is. I'm not looking for a deeper meaning. I'm just having fun with it. So whether that's something that you're interested in, you want to just pick up something for fun, you can do that. Or if you're a viewer and you do typically watch, like if you're younger and like the 13, 14, 15-year-olds and you also like vampires, then this one might be for you. It's a very cute romance. It's very PG. It's not like there's no graphic material whatsoever in this. So that is why I'm throwing it on, because honestly, if anything you can binge in this time period, you can probably binge this entire series in a weekend, because that's how quick they are. All right, and then my last recommendation, because I don't think I could recommend any books without throwing this series in there as well, But that's going to be the Wayward Children series by Sean McGuire. As you can tell, there are currently 5 books out in this series. And they all have something to do with each other. Essentially, you know, Every Heart a Doorway is the first one. Very tiny. I think this might be under 200 pages. The rest of them all kind of fall into various states. Why are my books all messed up? I don't like when my series are out of order. But I'm pretty sure this is the second book, Down Among the Sticks and Bones, and the 4th book are the biggest of the series, and they're a little bit over 200 pages. The rest of them either are under 200 or right around 200, and they're very quick and very bingeable. I like it because, like, I like the story format, and I think that could throw some people off because the story format is, like, very blunt, and it's, like, it's not as poetic, I would probably say, as some other novels that you might be used to, but I kind of like it because it's a very factual series. Like, if we had this type of world where children went through portals and went into fantastic worlds, this is what would happen. But again, even though it's a little bit more prosaic than a lot of series, I just think Shauna McGuire has, like, such an interesting way of putting words together. Like, she is a great writer, and I give her all the props in the world. But as I mentioned this on so many times in my channel, so I don't want to beat you over the head with this, but they're very short books. They're about children who go into different portals and find magical worlds and then end up coming back to our world and not knowing how to live. That's how the first book starts. The other books kind of follow suit, whether you're following characters who are actually in these worlds, living there, you're following their backstory on how they got there, you're following kind of future events of how, you know, they need to go save people in these worlds, so on and so forth. Currently, I don't think there's any end in sight for this book series. There is a 6th book going to be published next January, but for now, you have 4 that are very easily bingeable in a day. Alright, so there is my list. This video is probably going to be longer than I anticipated because I just get so excited, and I didn't realize I had so many book recommendations for things that you can binge in one day. But I hope that out of this list you found something that you might be interested in. And if you are stuck inside, if you aren't going anywhere, if you have vacation time or sick time and you're just taking that off, maybe some of these recommendations can get you through that period. So let me know down below, do you have any recommendations for me? Books that are very small or binge-worthy in a day or a day or two, even a few hours. And if so, let me know. Maybe I will check them out for myself. Until next time, guys, I'll see you then. Bye.